Michael Harding is known the world over for its wonderful range of oil paints. They have the reputation of being the highest quality, and there are colours that they produce that only they produce. But look what they've started doing. They have started about 18 months ago producing watercolours, which apparently were 20 years in the making. So the question we're going to ask today is whether Michael Harding watercolours bring the same quality and excellence as their oil paints do. My name's Liz Chatterton. I'm a watercolour artist based in Berkshire. Every week I share a tip, trick or technique that I wish I'd known about ages ago. I also like to look at watercolour supplies because you never know what you're going to find. This week I'm going to swatch out the paints that I've got from Michael Harding and see how they perform. I'll also share with you some of the paintings that I've painted with them so far and see how they actually hold up in real life situations. Just in the interest of transparency, I was sent these paints for free. Anything that I say here is purely my opinion, and it is my honest opinion. These are the paints I got sent to use in the different paintings, and it's a basic palette of a warm and cool primary, a couple of sort of convenience mixes, sap green and dioxazine purple, and then a burnt sienna because I refuse to paint anything without burnt sienna. The actual Michael Harding range has got 130 or just over 130 colours in it, and over 90 of those are single pigments. Some of these, like the Quin Gold, is a mix, the sap green is a mix, the others are single pigments in here. The tubes are 15 millilitres and they are basically filled to the top and overflowing. So you will notice, for example, that this is already looking mucky. I opened it, the paint exploded. You know, I'm not complaining that they've filled them to the top, but just be aware that you'll need to sort of wipe lids to stop them drying up and getting stuck. As you'd expect from an artist quality watercolour, they've actually got some information on the tube, thank goodness. They come in different series. That's just about the price of the pigment. It has got the pigment number, in this case lemon yellow PY175. And then on the back it's got information about the light fastness, in this case excellent. They seem to rate it from excellent, very good and good. It says whether it's staining or not, whether it granulates or not, and how transparent it is. So it's great just to have that information to hand. And I'd expect nothing less from a colour maker of this quality. What I want to do is swatch them out for you, see whether I agree with their assessment of transparency and opacity. And then I'll show you a few of the paintings that I've done with it and give you my verdict. I said that they've got 130 or just over 130 colours. Some of those are historical and some of those are modern. One that they have got, which sadly I didn't get sent, was lapis lazuli. The lapis lazuli in their oil range is meant to be an absolutely stunning colour, and they've put it into their watercolour range. And in fact, the watercolours have more colours than their oil colour range. Price-wise, for these 15 millilitre tubes, they range series 1 just over £11 up to that lapis lazuli £22.50. They're available online through Jackson's, and I'll put a link in the description if you decide to treat yourself. That will be an affiliate link, so it won't cost you anything extra, but I will get a small commission if you follow that link, and that does help support this channel, so I would be very grateful. What I'll do is just squeeze out a small amount onto my swatching chart that I've done, and then we'll get going. Right, let's grab our brush. What I've done is put a rectangle here and put a black line across so I can judge the opacity. I really like to do this when I get a new paint so I can make my own judgments, because I don't always agree with the manufacturer. Let's bring it right down. Quin Gold is one of my absolute favourite colours. It's a really warm orangey gold and used to be a pure pigment which is no longer available. So all this is an approximation. But you can see as we start to thin it down from that sort of straight out of the tube, how the yellow really comes through, and that's really rather beautiful. Now you might be surprised to see alizarin here, and it is a real alizarin. It is rated as a good light fastness, as opposed to some of the others which are excellent or very good. But there's something about alizarin which is just so beautiful. It's up to you whether you use it, because it is known to fade. The depth of colour that you can achieve with it and the way it mixes just makes it really special, along with that transparency. So your choice, but that's why I've got alizarin there. I just want to mention, when I squeezed out the ultramarine here, can you see that there's a little sort of puddle of transparency there? That's where the gum arabic has settled out. If it was worse than that, I would suggest getting a paper clip, unfolding it and putting it into the paint and actually mixing it up in the tube. You can give the tube a bit of a massage as well. What you don't want to do is squeeze out all that transparent gum arabic, because that alters the mix in the tube and it's going to be more prone to going hard in the tube later on. So try and mix it back in if you notice any separation. I am surprised at that separation because these are brand new tubes and they haven't been stored for a long time. I'm expecting to see some granulation on here because ultramarine always ends up granulating. So it'll be interesting to see how much there is. In fact, let me just help it on its way by adding lots of water and then leaving it in place. I'm terribly fond of Prussian blue. Actually, there aren't many colours I'm not fond of, but with that sort of greeny tinge, isn't that beautiful? I think it's handy to have a couple of, say, what I would call convenience colours in your basic palette. Something like a sap green. And in fact, that is really rather lovely. It's very muted. Some sap greens are really a bit too sort of vivid in your face, but that is a really pleasant sort of foliage type green, quite plausible. Looks to me like that may granulate as well. What does it say on the tube? It's they class that as a granulating colour. Again, dioxazine purple or violet, whatever you want to call it. Such a pretty colour, such a fierce colour. A little goes a long way. And you can see how pigmented these colours are, which is of course what you would expect from a decent artist quality watercolour. I say, I think if I was only allowed one colour in the world, I think it would be burnt sienna. So I need this to be a good one to really get some richness out of that. Really make a judgment while they're wet, so we'll let those dry, and I will let them dry naturally so I can see what sort of granulation comes out of them. Doing that, I just wanted to point out, so let's look at the Quin Gold, and hopefully my camera can focus, and I just want to point out that there is a warning on the back of here. It says warning, cancer and reproductive harm, and that's because of the nickel in the pigment. We think of watercolours as being certainly less noxious than oil paints because of the solvents, or than pastels because of the dust, or those sorts of things. But it is really worth being aware that some of your watercolours will have toxic components in them. Depending where you live and what sort of your water purification system is, you may think that you don't want to have those in your palette, or you may be careful with disposing of your water. So that's got nickel in it, which makes it harmful. This is a real cadmium, not a cadmium hue. If you see hue, it just means there's an approximation of the colour, but this is cadmium, and cadmium has got the warning as well. And let me think, the warning is sap green. So do look out for that. Just because they don't have a warning on it, I certainly wouldn't eat the stuff, But if you see that little symbol, be aware of what you're doing and make your decisions about which paint that you want to have. So they're all dry, or dry enough. Obviously I've still got blobs of paint up here, but I just wanted to look at the opacity, and really the only one that's showing up as opaque is the cadmium red. Let me lift this up just to see whether it shows up on the camera. Can you see how the red is sort of veiling that black line? I would have expected to see more opacity on the lemon yellow. They've called it semi-transparent, and I would always think of it as semi-opaque, but that's not showing up at all. It did when I painted it on. When it was wet it did, but as it's dried it has become more transparent. So really that cadmium red is the only one showing up as with any opacity. While they were drying, I went through the tubes as well to look at what they said about granulation, because very helpfully they put on the granulation on the tubes. Most people don't, so that is a good plus. They reckoned you would get granulation from the Quin Gold, which I would be really surprised about, and I can't see any evidence. They said you would get very fine granulation for the cadmium red, and indeed I can actually see some granulation, and I'm surprised because again I wouldn't expect to see that particularly with the cad red, so there is a little bit going on. Ultramarine blue is notorious for granulation, and indeed you can see a little bit here. If you really want to test granulation, put it on a rougher paper, but I can see some going on there. They predicted granulation from the Prussian blue, which I'd be amazed if we got, and I can't see any evidence of that. I mean, I've got this back run going on, but not anything else. That sap green, they predict granulation, and indeed there is. I really like that sap green. Say most sap greens are a bit more yellowy than that, but that is a beautiful colour. The purple, again, they've said granulation fine. I'm not seeing any evidence, and I really wouldn't expect it. And then they predict granulation on the burnt sienna. Now, if you mix burnt sienna and ultramarine to get either a grey or a brown, depending on the amount of mix, you get gorgeous granulation. Let's just check how well they lift or how much they stain. So to do that, I just use a short flat brush with some pretty stiff bristles. I rub across, I don't know how many times was that, 4 times, and dab away what I've lifted. And you can see there that the lemon yellow lifts really well back to the white. So we would say that's not a staining colour, whereas you can see with the Quinacridone gold, yes, it has lifted, but there's a lot of yellow left in the paper, so that is staining. Let's just check whether they agree with me. Well, they say staining power low. I will put that beyond low personally. Let's do the same with our cad red. Ooh, which I've just used a clean piece of paper, I think would be the secret there, having just put a big splodge of Quin Gold there. Let's ignore the Quin Gold. That hasn't lifted as much as I expected, and indeed they say the staining power is medium. Usually I wouldn't expect cad red to stain so much, but this is proper cadmium red, so maybe I've been using hues, or well, not maybe, I know I have. I would expect Alizarin to stain, but actually that doesn't lift too badly. Again, they say medium there. You can see that the ultramarine lifts pretty well, and indeed they say it's low staining. I'm not expecting the Prussian blue to lift terribly well, and indeed it doesn't. The sap green doesn't lift very well. I wouldn't expect the purple to lift particularly well. You can really see the staining there. I might expect the burnt sienna to lift a bit better. It says staining power low, medium. I'd
probably put that as a medium. So you can see that the lemon yellow lifts very well, the ultramarine lifts very well, whereas the others are quite staining. So that just gives you an indication of how much the pigment is sinking into the paper and bonding with the paper. And it says to you that if you need to correct your work, lighten your work, or lift for other reasons, for artistic reasons, yeah, you are going to struggle with Dioxazine purple, because you will struggle with Alizarin. You will be able to do more if you've used lemon yellow. Palette I was using with the colours, and there's a bit of the purple left over and the Quin Gold there, and I thought you might want to see how easily it re-wet. One of the joys of watercolour is that you can leave it in your palette and then just come back the next day or days later and you get lovely fresh colour. So I've found these paints re-wet beautifully. If you want to squeeze some of this paint out into a travelling palette, or you're going off to an art class, or you just prefer to have it in pans, they are great. I have been using a lovely mix. I love Dioxazine purple with Quin Gold. It just makes the most glorious range of browns. Sorry, that's totally by the by, but isn't that just a lovely juicy brown? Show you some of the paintings I've been doing as well. Obviously this is a line and wash of a bulldog, and I really loved the way the paint moved on the paper. I did the paint first. I was going to say I did the ink first. I didn't. I did the paint first and just put it down quite loosely, and I got some absolutely beautiful marks out of it, which I loved. And you can see that it's mixed on the surface to produce all sorts of lovely colours. This is another line and wash in a different style. This one I did the pen work first in that scribble, and then just used washes to come on top. And again, I found the paint flowed beautifully and was really reactive on the surface, which I absolutely love. It is very pigmented, so a little goes a long way. If you want to see how pigmented it is, look at the colours on this. So totally different style. This is with stenciling. As I say, I'm doing these webinars in the autumn of 24, but just preparing ahead. So if you fancy joining me, look out for details. So the vibrancy of that lemon yellow here, just gorgeous, and I wanted that tropical depth. This is a bit big for the camera angle I've got at the moment. But there you go, there is my giraffe, and just to give you a clue of some of the colours that I used in there, and just the sort of nuance that you can get going. And then a lot of the background is all Quin Gold, beautifully reactive on the surface, and I've deliberately introduced things like these watermarks just to add a bit of interest. And you can see how well those pigments react with salt. This is all sprinkled in salt to give really lovely texture to my giraffe. Had great fun with that. Just while I'm on the giraffe theme, I thought you might like to see this, and this is painted with 3 colours only: the Prussian blue, the Alizarin and the Quin Gold, that I've used to mix up all these different browns right through to the darks, and then the purples of the background. The demonstration is all about colour mixing and how you can do an awful lot with just your 3 primaries. But again, the wet in wet, which is what I used on the main here, was absolutely lovely, and I deliberately dropped water into some of these marks so that I got these beautiful water marks and water blooms as part of the texture. I found these paints really nice to work with. So I guess the question is, are they the right paints for you? They are beautiful quality. I have to say, I've really enjoyed using them. They're certainly not the cheapest artist quality, but you do get what you pay for, so cheap isn't always good, let's be honest. My gut feeling is that some of their specialist colours could be really worth going for. Let me be absolutely honest here. If I was buying the basic set of artist quality tube colours, I might not choose theirs simply because of the price point. However, would love to explore some of their other mixes and their heritage colours. I would love to get my hands on that lapis lazuli. The reason I'm inspired by this mix, they've obviously really thought about their colours. These are definitely made by people who know colour and who know paint. Maybe I would get some of the basic colours, still an artist quality, but from a slightly cheaper range, and then mix in and introduce some of their specialist colours, because the quality is absolutely gorgeous. I love the information that they provide, which certainly gives me reassurance that, you know, these are made by people who are passionate about colour. I have no doubt for that. My conclusion: beautiful paints made by people who know what they're doing. Definitely worth considering as a treat. Look for their specialist colours, and I think you'll have a whole pile of fun with those.